It has been moves galore this offseason for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they have a one-year rental of a shining star of old at quarterback. Will he be their man of steel, and will they have fancy relevance this season? We're going to have an attempt at answering those questions now, aren't we, Ed? And should we start immediately at quarterback with the man who likes to keep as much of the offseason storylines on himself as possible, Mr. Aaron
There he
Rodgers.
is. Mr. Hiding his light under a bushel, Mr. Aaron Rodgers. And of course, we are both huge Steelers fans, so hopefully that bias won't seep into our analysis of the Steelers. But yes.
Let's wave a towel. Let's wave a towel. Sorry, Steelers fans. Carry on, Ed.
No, we will be fair. I mean, the Aaron Rodgers circus arrives in Pittsburgh as expected. He dragged it out as expected. But he has confirmed this will be his last season. Who knows if that's true? It could be another ploy to get more attention on him. But, I mean, let's not forget. I mean, obviously, in the past, he was an absolute fantasy machine. 11 top 10 finishes in fantasy quarterback rankings. 7 of those were top 2 finishers. But those days are behind him. He actually had an okay season last year for the Jets from a fantasy perspective. When looking at his stats, I was quite surprised to see that he finished as QB 15, and he had 12 weeks with a score of 15 plus fantasy points. So that made him pretty reliable last season, to be honest. And there would have been a few teams that stumbled across him and had him as their quarterback. He does have some weapons, as we'll talk about. But Mike Tomlin has always had a rush-heavy offense. They were 28th in pass percentage and 29th in pass attempts last year. And Rodgers himself only managed 6.7 yards per passing attempt. So he's not unleashing the big bombs anymore. Is he maybe worth a punt as a backup quarterback or, like as you suggested with the graphic, a bye-week pickup? But I think he's mainly going to be a plug-and-play option maybe later in the season. And I don't think he's really going to be fantasy relevant.
No, I agree. And for the exact reasons that you've said, I think the rush is where the majority of the fantasy production is going to come in Pittsburgh. Rodgers is still better than many quarterbacks out there, to be fair to him, but isn't what he once was. Yeah, if he's on your waiver wire and you've got bye weeks coming up, he'll probably be a fair pickup that won't necessarily completely let you down. But those exciting days are gone, and obviously our bias will always be there. If there's anybody else in that ballpark I could pick up off the waiver wire than Aaron Rodgers, I absolutely would do, whether it burns me or not, I guess.
It's very hard playing Steelers players as Ravens and Bengals fans.
However, the next Steelers player we're about to talk about is one that I was really excited about in the pre-draft process. Was gutted he went to Pittsburgh because I'm still going to want him to do well, and he's a player that I'm really interested in for fantasy, for redraft, dynasty, in all formats really this season.
That's right. We're looking at Caleb Johnson, a round 3 pickup in this year's draft, looking like he might emerge as RB1 in Pittsburgh with Najee Harris moving on. We'll talk about Jaylen Warren shortly. I mean, Caleb Johnson had a phenomenal final college season, over 1,500 yards and 21 touchdowns, led to that pre-draft hype. He had a bit of a disappointing combine, which I think contributed to him dropping to the 3rd round. But there's undoubted talent there. He's a big back who'll get a lot of work. He's probably going to share the backfield with Jaylen Warren. But I think he's going to emerge as RB1. And he's going off the board at about RB30 at the moment, which could be an absolute steal. But I'm still a little bit hesitant with Warren about.
I think it's Johnson's size that is really appealing. I think that makes him perhaps more suited to be the lead back. And just looking at the vacated touches, that Najee Harris averaged 319 touches per year with Jaylen Warren there as well. And another stat that every time I looked at it during the pre-draft process was just amazing. Caleb Johnson accounted for 76% of Iowa's total yardage last year. Now, yes, that's college. Yes, that's Iowa. Yes, that isn't NFL defenses. But if you can carry that much of your team's output at college, it puts you in a fair chance, doesn't it, to carry on being productive at NFL level, we'd hope. Is he a player that you're going to be happy to target around ADP?
I think so. As I say, going off the board at RB30, if he comes through and emerges as RB1 and the type of game that Tomlin and the Steelers play, he's going to get a hell of a lot of work. And, he will absolutely smash that RB30. So, I think he's somebody who you've got to be interested in. And I imagine as the season gets closer, he'll probably start to move up draft boards.
And I think as well, through the season, he's a sort of player that you might not be 100% confident plugging straight into your starting lineup week one. I think it's going to be a player you'll be confident with a flex player. And then as we see with many running backs, especially as the season rumbles on, he could be a player who's returning you decent RB2 numbers, maybe as his ceiling this year.
I think so. And I think there's also the elephant in the room of, if we move on to look at Jaylen Warren. So Jaylen Warren is still there, and he is worth talking about. There are other running backs there, the likes of Gainwell, Sermon, and Patterson. I don't think we really need to waste any time on them. But Warren was RB39 last year, but he only had 5 weeks where he scored 10 or more fantasy points, which is not what you're looking for. He's flattered to deceive as a running back. We've been waiting for him to break out, a la Kyle Pitts. But his 3 seasons in the NFL, he's been RB47, RB22, and RB39. Is he just destined to be an also-ran? And I suppose when you look at that, you think Caleb Johnson, will probably emerge ahead of him, and Warren will remain or end up in his shadow.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's the sort of player that you might get some weeks home, but you never starting him hoping he's going to win you a week. And whereas Caleb Johnson, because he's a rookie, we can see a path to him continue to grow this season. I think we'd have probably seen a bit more consistency in a few more bigger games, wouldn't we, from Warren by now, if it was going to happen. Before we move on, let's have a quick shout out to ourselves. Please do subscribe, like, and share. Get down involved in the comments below as well. And whilst you are on the channel, keep an eye out for the whole of the offseason as we release these deep dive shows on all 32 NFL teams. But we are still with the Steelers, and we are moving on to wide receiver. Have there been any big moves at wide receiver in Pittsburgh over the offseason?
There's only one to talk about. Yeah, they've made that big move at wide receiver, trading for DK Metcalf from the Seahawks. Look at him, an absolutely fine figure of a man is DK.
I could see several pictures when I was preparing this of him in Steelers attire, but I just like this picture.
It is very hunky, isn't it? Is that still a word we can use?
I don't think anymore. No, that's about 20
no, maybe
years
not. There's only one wide receiver worth talking about in Pittsburgh now. Pickens has moved on. It feels like DK's been around for a long time. He's still only 27. And let's remember, after a quiet rookie season, he burst onto the scene in 2020 when he finished as wide receiver 7. But that's proved to be his only top 10 finish, as he's dropped down the order every year. He's gone from 7 to 14 to 16 to 21 to a disappointing wide receiver 32 last year. He only exceeded 4 receptions 4 times in 2024, and you'd expect him to increase his workload to become a value fantasy pick this year. He's going off the board at wide receiver 22. So clearly, fantasy managers are expecting him to have a better year with Aaron Rodgers, with him being, the main target for receptions for Rodgers. The problem I can see in Pittsburgh is that surely Metcalf's going to draw a lot of attention from opponent defenses. And there's not much else for Rodgers to target at wide receiver. So does DK get tied down? Does he struggle to break the shackles? I don't know. And of course, Rodgers is not the player that he was. So, yeah, I think wide receiver 22 is maybe a bit too high for my liking for DK Metcalf. I'm not that hopeful that he will break the top 20. I don't know whether you disagree.
I think at the minute, based purely on Rodgers' play style and DK being the only real threat that he might get there on volume. I think what's important to say is we are recording on the 6th of July, and what hasn't happened yet that is very on brand for Aaron Rodgers is he's not brought a friend with him to throw the ball to yet.
Yeah.
Could that happen? That wouldn't surprise me if at some point we see a trade of one of Rodgers' receivers of old joining in as well. So that could change. Yeah, I think DK just feels he feels like he's been better than he has been. I think it's because that when he does get a big play, it's a proper Hollywood highlight reel style play, isn't it? And that sticks in your mind a little bit more. The thing going for him, though, is he's not got a huge amount as far as the wide receiver depth start to challenge him at present, has he?
No. I mean, when we look at the other wide receivers in Pittsburgh, you've got Roman Wilson, who's coming into his sophomore year after injuries ruined his rookie season. He's got a lot to prove, obviously, and I don't expect him to get much work under Arthur Smith, who's very much that run-first offensive coach. Bobby Trees, we love him, but he's 33, looks over the hill. His last fancy relevant year was 2020, so a long time ago, and we'll always love him, but fancy relevant no more. And Calvin Austin, just another wide receiver at Pittsburgh who's underwhelmed. 5'9", very fast. Played a lot in the slot last year, but I don't think he's going to get the workload to be fancy relevant.
I think all the talk at the minute, at the time recording anyway, is that Calvin Austin is the player that will be emerging as the wide receiver too. And I think that's more of a negative indictment on the wide receiver depth chart than it is praise for Calvin Austin, isn't it, really? And the other reason I'm
a wide receiver too is not the best situation to be in.
But I'm not sure that Pittsburgh are too worried about that, because as we move to tight end and have been moves at tight end in Pittsburgh, that's really where you expect the receptions to go, isn't it? Once you look beyond DK Metcalf presently.
Indeed. I mean, their number 2 receiver undoubtedly is going to be their pickup, Jonnu Smith, because a very recent pickup. And, it took a while to get rolling in 2024. But after the week 6 bye for the Dolphins, he was an absolute beast. He benefited as the Dolphins offense adapted to poor O-line and quarterback play with lots of kind of short passes used to keep the chains moving. He had 8 weeks as a tight end 1 and ended up with 8 touchdowns as tight end 4 overall. So, I mean, the question, I suppose, is 2024 signs of a late bloomer? He'd never exceeded 582 yards in 7 previous seasons, or is it a bit of a flash in the pan? In Miami, I think he was probably going to look at losing some targets to the likes of Hill and Waddle as they bounce back from very disappointing years. But I think in Pittsburgh, it's an absolute dream situation for him. You would expect he's coming in there off the back of a great season, and he looks like the second receiver in Pittsburgh. Would you agree?
I think so, yes. I mean, we were due to record this cluster of shows a week ago. And at that point, I had Jonnu Smith down as potentially being tight end 7 this upcoming season. I just worry that there is going to be rotation there with Freiermuth, who we're about to talk about next. We've said a few times, when you look that the whole body of work would suggest a one-off season or chunk of a season several years into a player's career can be that outlier for the bigger picture. The move, yes, it's into a promising situation, but that does concern me a little bit as well. So I'm not hugely confident in Jonnu Smith at the moment. It would depend on ADP, and I think ADP is absolutely going to continue to fall from where it is at the moment, because a lot of that will be based on drafts from the previous month. Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see how that shakes out. But I think one thing that the Jonnu Smith move does do, as well as making me a little bit lower on him, I think pretty much puts me all out on Pat Freiermuth.
Yeah, I mean, before the Jonnu Smith move, I was fairly high on Pat Freiermuth because he was going off the board as tight end 18. And I thought that represented really good value and underrated him. He was top 10 tight end last year. which was a disappointing year for tight ends overall, in fairness. But he did have that really strong end to the season. And, I was, maybe in on him as a late pickup, as maybe my backup tight end. But no, I think the Jonnu Smith move does affect Freiermuth even more. They'll both get touches, undoubtedly, but I think Jonnu Smith will probably emerge as tight end 1 ahead of Freiermuth.
Yeah, I completely agree. There is a world where Freiermuth does kick on. It seems more improbable than Jonnu Smith taking the lead on being the real life and fancy relevant tight end in Pittsburgh. Where do you put Pittsburgh's chances this season? I mean, the one thing that I am very annoyed about with all these moves that are fairly positive for Pittsburgh compared to where they were last season is it makes the AFC North even more of a challenging landscape for Ravens and Bengals to be in, as we well know. What do you think their chances are on the season actually in the NFL?
Well, I assume they will get 9 or 10 wins. They will make the playoffs and they will lose in the first round of the playoffs because that's what Pittsburgh do. I mean, Mike Tomlin gets winning record after winning record. So there's nothing, their defense will continue to be absolute beasts. They've lost Minkah Fitzpatrick, but they've gained, what's his name? The Dolphins guy they've got defense in that big trade. What's he called?
I'm going to let you keep going.
I can't remember his name.
Jalen. Jalen.
Yeah, I can't think of his surname. Ramsey. Sorry.
There you go.
Jalen.
I was going to leave that, but we'd have gone past 25 minutes, I think.
We would have done. I'd have still been saying Warren. But yeah, they're Jalen Ramsey, which makes them stronger at cornerback. Which as a Bengals fan with the likes of Chase and Higgins, worries me. But yeah, they'll be very, very competitive once again. But will they make a big mark in the playoffs? I'm not massively sure. I don't think so.
Well, I think that wraps up all things Pittsburgh from us. Maybe it's time for us to throw in the towel, Edward, and say goodbye from me, goodbye from you, and to finish the show, Malcolm, take us home.
You have been listening to Pestle and Ed of TH Fantasy Football. For more content, follow TH_fantasy_NFL on Instagram and Twitter.